the bachelors, the 4 bachelors, usually bachelors and brahmacharis have different definitions of it. Yeah, it's sort of humorous because usually it refers to them as brahmacharis. So are you speaking about the one that has 4 verses together with a purport? Yeah. 13 to 16. Yeah, 13 to 16. 13 to 16? 12 through 16. Yeah, 12 to 16.
Alex, can you get going?
Jai.
Śhrīmad-Bhāgavatam ki
Jai.
Svāmī ki
Jai. Hari Hari Bol.
all glories,
Hari
all glories,
Hari
all glories,
Hari.
all glories to Shri Guru, Shri Guru. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo
Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Ajnanatirandasya Jnananjanasalakaya Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Shtapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupaka Damayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Cha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhunam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitam Cha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Brindavan Eshvari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasari Gaur Bhakta Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Okay, let's see if I can get this thing to turn on. Okay. What's that sound? I guess it's those people across the street building it catches in this alcove here, and then we hear it through the door.
If you attain the spiritual world, you don't have to worry about sounds of construction or destruction.
Yeah. Things are created directly by the Supreme Lord's energy, so no need to bang stuff around. But I guess it's appropriate since we're talking about creation, so we're in the same category of discussion. Canto 2, Chapter 6, verse 12. Dharmasya mama tubhyam cha. Dharmasya mama tubhyam cha. Kumaranam bhavasya cha. Kumaranam bhavasya cha. Vijnanasya cha sattvasya. Vijnanasya cha sattvasya. Parasyatma parayanam. Parasyatma parayanam. Dharmasya mama tubhyam cha. Kumaranam bhavasya cha. Vijnanasya cha sattvasya. Parasyatma parayanam. Dharmasya mama tubhyam cha. Kumaranam bhavasya cha. Vijnanasya cha sattvasya. Parasyatma parayanam. Dharmasya mama tubhyam cha. Kumaranam bhavasya cha. Vijnanasya cha sattvasya. Parasyatma parayanam. Dharmasya mama tubhyam cha. Kumaranam bhavasya cha. Vijnanasya cha sattvasya. Parasyatma parayanam. Dharmasya mama tubhyam cha. Kumaranam bhavasya cha. Vijnanasya cha sattvasya. Parasyatma parayanam. Dharmasya of religious principles or of Yamaraj. Mama, mine. Tubhyam, of yours. Cha, and. Kumaranam, of the four Kumaras. Bhavasya, Lord Shiva. Cha, and also. Vijnanasya, of transcendental knowledge. Cha, also. Sattvasya, of truth. Parasya, of the great personality. Atma, consciousness. Parayanam, dependent. So this verse translates, also, the consciousness of that great personality is the abode of religious principles. Mine, yours, and those four bachelors, Sanak, Sanatana, Sanat Kumar, and Sanandana. That consciousness is also the abode of truth and transcendental knowledge. So I say, and you please repeat, also that consciousness of that great personality is the abode of religious principles. Mine, yours, and those of the four bachelors. Sanaka, Sanatana, Sanat Kumar, and Sanandana. That consciousness is also the abode of truth and transcendental knowledge. Okay, so there's no purport. I'll read the next one. Aham bhavam bhavaschaiva ta ime munayo grajaha surasura nara nagaha kagha mriga sarishprashaha gandharva psaraso yaksha raksho bhuta gano ragaha pashava pitara siddha vidyadharas charana drumaha anyecha vividha jiva jalasthala na bokashaha graharksha ketavas taras tardita stanayitnavaha sarvang purusha evedam bhutam bhavyam bhavachayat tenedam amritam vishvang vitastim adhitik shtitati. So this verse translates, beginning from me, Brahma, down to you, and Bhava, or Shiva, all the great sages who were born before you, the demigods, the demons, the nagas, the human beings, the birds, the beasts, as well as the reptiles, etc., and all phenomenal manifestations of the universes, namely the planets, stars, asteroids, luminaries, lightning, thunder, and the inhabitants of different planetary systems, namely the Gandharvas, Apsaras, Yakshas, Rakshas, Bhutanagas, Bhutaganas, Uragas, Pashus, Pitas, Siddhas, Vidyadharas, Charanas, and all other different varieties of living entities, including the birds, beasts, trees, and everything that be, are all covered by the universal form of the Lord at all times, namely past, present, and future. Although he is transcendental to all of them, eternally existing in a form not exceeding 9 inches. Okay, that's kind of convoluted, so I'll read it again kind of slowly. Beginning from me, Brahman, down to you, and Bhava, or Shiva, all the great sages who were born before you, the demigods, the demons, the nagas, and human beings, the birds, beasts, as well as the reptiles, etc., and all phenomenal manifestations of the universes, namely the planets, stars, asteroids, luminaries, lightning, thunder, and the inhabitants of the different planetary systems, namely the Gandharvas, Apsaras, Yakshas, Rakshasas, Bhutaganas, Uragas, Pashus, Pitas, Siddhas, Vidyadharas, Charanas, and all other different varieties of living entities, including birds, beasts, trees, and everything that be, are all covered by the universal form of the Lord at all times, namely past, present, and future. Although he is transcendental to all of them, existing in a form not exceeding 9 inches. So, the purport reads thus: the Supreme Personality of Godhead, by his partial representation, measuring not more than 9 inches, as Supersoul, expands by his potential energy in the shape of the universal form, which includes everything manifested in different varieties of organic and inorganic materials. The manifested varieties of the universe are therefore not different from the Lord, just as the golden ornaments of different shapes and forms are non-different from the original stock reserve of gold. In other words, the Lord is the Supreme Person who controls everything within the creation, and still he remains the supreme separate identity, distinct from all manifested material creation. In Bhagavad Gita 9, verse 4 and 5, he is therefore said to be Yogeshvara. Everything rests on the potency of Lord Sri Krishna. And still the Lord is different from and transcendental to all such identities. In the Vedic Purusha Shukta of the Rig Mantra, this is also confirmed. This philosophical truth of simultaneous oneness and difference was propounded by Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and it is known as Achintya Veda Bheda Tattva. Brahma, Narada, and all others are simultaneously one with the Lord and different from the Supreme Lord. We are all one with him, just as gold ornaments are one in quality with the stock gold. But the individual ornament is never equal in quantity with the stock gold. The stock gold is never exhausted, even if there is innumerable ornaments emanating from the stock, because the stock is Purnam, complete. Even if Purnam is deducted from the Purnam, still the Supreme Purnam remains the same Purnam. This fact is inconceivable to our present imperfect senses. Lord Chaitanya, therefore, defined his theory of philosophy as achintya, or inconceivable. And as confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita, as well as the Bhāgavatam, Lord Chaitanya's theory of Achintya Veda Veda Tattva is the perfect philosophy of the absolute truth. Dharmasya mama tubhyam cha kumaranam bhavasya cha vijnanasya sasatvasya parasyatma parayanam. Also, the consciousness of that great personality is the abode of religious principles, mine, yours, and those of the four bachelors, Sanaka, Sanatana, Sanat Kumar, and Sanandana. That consciousness is also the abode of truth, or truth and transcendental knowledge. Beginning from Brahma down to you, Baba or Shiva, all the great sages were born from you, the demigods, the demons, the nagas, the human beings, birds, beasts, as well as reptiles, etc. And all phenomenal manifestations of the universes, namely the planets, stars, asteroids, luminaries, lightning, thunder, and the inhabitants of different planetary systems, namely the Gandharvas, Apsaras, Yakshas, Rakshasas, Bhutaganas, Uragas, Pashus, Pitas, Siddhas, Vidyadharas, Charanas, and all other different varieties of living entity, including birds, beasts, trees, and everything that be, are all covered by the universal form of the Lord at all times, namely past, present, and future, although he is transcendental to all of them, eternally existing in a form not exceeding 9 inches. So before I start, maybe I can ask the question if there's any particular question that you have about what we are discussing here. Anything that stands out as being particularly mysterious? Yeah. 9 inches, right.
So is that for an average human being it's 9 inches? Or is that smaller being smaller than 9 inches would be correspondingly proportionally smaller?
Yeah. Here, the super soul is described as being 9 inches. I think just earlier he was described as being 12 fingers or something like that, which is, I guess approximately the same as 9 inches. But in other places, he is described as being the size of the thumb. So I'm not clear how that works, but the place where he's described as being the size of a thumb, it's also explained that he is the size of the thumb to the respective body of whatever it is that he is inside, you know. So for an ant, it's the size of the ant's thumb, or approximately what if an ant had a thumb, you know, get that. So as we're seeing this Purusha Shukta, or rather the Purusha Shukta, which as we were discussing before is part of the Rig Veda, is describing this Virat Purush, the universal form. And the Virat Purush is connected to everything in the material world. The Virat Purush, as we're reading here, emanates from the Supersoul, or the Paramatma. And the Paramatma emanates from Kshirodakshai Vishnu. So we have Mahavishnu, who breathes out all the universes, and then Mahavishnu expands himself and then enters into each universe individually. And when he enters into each universe individually, he expands one more time as Kshirodakshai Vishnu. And Kshirodakshai Vishnu resides on Dhruvaloka, Pole Star, whatever you want to call it. And this place is also sometimes called Svetadvip, where there he rests again on a serpent bed, but this time it's in a milk ocean. So he rests on a milk ocean. And from this Sveta Vishnu, or the Kshirodakshai Vishnu, from this Vishnu comes the Supersoul, and from the Supersoul comes this Virat Rup, the universal form. So that's kind of the breakdown there. Other immediate questions anybody has about this particular section? Yeah.
I don't have a question, but I was going to comment on the 9 inches.
Uh-huh.
So I'm just coming to the Krishna consciousness movement, but before I came here, I learned about numerology, and 9 is said to be a very spiritual number. It's a number of completion. So I'm thinking here, maybe they may be alluding to not 9 inches like physically, in the physical like way we would be thinking about 9 inches. Sorry. But 9 inches in the sense that Krishna is complete, and 9 is the only number that goes back to itself in all of its multiples. So once you get to 9, it's like the end of the number system. So even in a big person or a small person or an animal or an ant, 9 is just representing that Krishna is complete in all forms.
Yeah, that's actually what Prabhupada says in the purport, which he talks about. Maybe he doesn't connect it to the number 9, but he talks about Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnam Udachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vasishyate, which is from the Ishopanishad, which is interesting. It says the Supreme Lord is perfect and complete, and as such, all emanations from him are also perfect and complete. And although many perfect and complete emanations come from him, he remains yet the supreme complete, and he's never diminished in any kind of way. So this is kind of a little bit mysterious. Actually in mathematics, there's a similar conception, you know. The concept of infinity in mathematics is a perplexing concept. And generally, it is thought of in a number of ways. But when we think about infinity, actually what we're talking about is the Supreme Lord, even in mathematics. So in higher mathematics, it's usually said or thought that if you add infinity to infinity, you still have infinity. And if you subtract infinity from infinity, you still have infinity. So this is oddly very reminiscent of Om Purnamidam Purnamidam Purnat Purnam Udachyate. It's very reminiscent of that idea. So everything comes from the Supreme. We were hearing in the previous verse about the impersonal feature of the Lord, so the Brahman. And the Brahman is also related to this Virat Rup. And this chapter describes how everything comes from the Supreme Lord, including the planetary systems, the gross elements, including the inhabitants of those various planetary systems. And here in the Vedas, we have a whole list of names of terrestrial and extraterrestrial entities. And there are various places where these various entities live. And they are part of the overall scheme of creation. And here, we learn that the Supreme Lord is the agency by which everything is created and manifests. And as Prabhupada points out in Bhagavad Gita in chapter 9, 4, and 5, Maya tatamidam sarvam jagad avyaktamurtina matstani sarvabhutani nachaham teshvavashtitaha. By me in my unmanifested form, this entire universe is pervaded. All beings are in me, but I am not in them. So Krishna is saying the same thing in chapter 9 of Bhagavad Gita, but he's not getting as detailed about it as he does in Bhagavatam there in the second canto. He's speaking to Arjuna. He's not explaining to Arjuna exactly how he comes out. But later on in chapter 11 of Bhagavad Gita, he will display this whole universal form. So here he's hinting at it in chapter 9, but in chapter 11 he'll actually display it. And then he says, the next verse, 5, Nacha matstani bhutani pasyame yogam aishvaram bhuta brinna cha bhutho sto mamatma bhuta bhavanaha. And yet everything that is created does not rest in me. Behold my mystic opulence. Although I am the maintainer of all living entities and although I am everywhere, I am not a part of this cosmic manifestation, for myself is the very source of creation. So we're hearing again this same theme of the Ishopanishad, Om Purnamada Purnamidam. Everything comes from Krishna, everything is within Krishna, and yet Krishna is still more. You can take everything in the universe and put it in a big pile somehow or other, and Krishna is still more than that. You can take everything in the spiritual universes as well and put that also collectively there, and Krishna is still more than that. Krishna is more than everything else, all sum totaled, because he is yet in himself of himself, and he is beyond everything else. How that exactly works, as Prabhupada says, is hard for the material conditioned mind to grasp, and therefore it is achintya. So he is one with and also beyond everything. And Prabhupada uses this analogy, which we hear about gold the sum total of the reservoir of all gold in the universe. So you could make various kinds of jewelry out of these various items of gold. And each of these items of small jewelry have the properties of gold, but none of them is equal to the entire aggregate of all gold possible. So this is one way we can understand Achintya Bheda Bheda Tattva, that Krishna is one with everything, and yet he's apart from it. And we are also one with that everything that Krishna is one with. But at the same time, we are not the totality of everything. We are only a tiny part. Krishna is the whole of the one, and we are the tiny piece of the one. So in Canto 3, in the 20th chapter, we get a little more that kind of explains what's going on here. That we're hearing that the first aspect of creation is done by the Supreme Lord. And the first aspect is this Mahavishnu expanding into Garbhavishnu and creating the universes. And then this Garbhavishnu lying down in the, the Garbhavishnu comes into the universe and there's nothing there. So from his perspiration, he fills it half up with water. And then he lies down on Ananta Sesh. And because of the desire and the destiny of the living entities, their destiny causes a lotus flower to grow from the navel of Garbhavishnu. And this lotus flower has Brahma seated on the top of this lotus flower. The lotus flower is huge, and it says in the 20th chapter of 3rd Canto, the lotus flower actually encompasses the entire universe. This one universe is encompassed by a giant lotus flower. And Brahma, when he first awakens at the top of this lotus flower, he is not sure where he is. He doesn't know what's going on. And he looks and he sees only darkness in all directions. And then the winds of destruction are causing the lotus flower to sway back and forth, and he's feeling very apprehensive. He decides that he will climb down the stem of the lotus, and maybe by climbing down the stem of the lotus, he'll figure out what he needs to do. But try as he may, he goes down the stem and nothing particularly happens, So he climbs back to the top of the lotus flower and he begins to meditate on the Supreme Lord. And there he hears the syllable tapa twice. So tapa means austerity. And so he engages in austerities and continues his meditation. And eventually the Supreme Lord reveals in his mind how Brahma has to go about creating the universe. So he then undertakes the process of creating the universe. So at first Brahma's bewildered, he doesn't know what to do, and then he begins the process of creation. So this is the Brahma's version of creation. First there's the Supreme Lord's version of creation where he creates the raw materials, and then there's Brahma's version where Brahma begins to create further developments. And as we're hearing about today in this verse that we read in Bhagavatam, that first he has to create the planetary systems. So according to 3rd Canto, there are the seeds of all the planetary systems within the stem of the lotus, and Brahma takes those and then generates the various planets, because before you can have creatures, you got to have somewhere for them to do something, so there has to be some planetary systems. And he creates the planets and divides them into 3 and then later into 14. And this giant lotus flower that Brahma is sitting on top of is also sometimes called Brahmaloka. So this place where Brahma is sitting is the highest planet, and that is the place where Brahma himself resides. And now that the planetary systems are developed, then it comes time for Brahma to actually create beings. But before he can do that, he still has to do some other steps. So Brahma begins to create in an unusual way. He creates by manifesting things from his own body. So Brahma's going to create things. What would you suspect would be the first thing that he would have to create in the material universe? What's that? Yeah, that would seem logical, but wrong. What's that?
Other people, the Prajapatis to help him create.
Yeah, well, that's there too. But it's interesting that in third canto of Śhrīmad-Bhāgavatam, the thing that Brahma has to create first is something you would never suspect. He has to create ignorance. To create a material universe, one of the first ingredients that's necessary for a material universe, so if you want to build a material universe, you've got to first go to Lowe's and get some ignorance. And it comes in 5 flavors. So it's described that there are 5 types of ignorance. There's Tamishra, Andhatra-mishra, Tamas, Moha, and Mahamoha. So these are 5 types of ignorance. And you can see that the material universe could not exist without ignorance. Ignorance is not a byproduct, not a mistake, not a lack of fulfillment. It's an ingredient of the material universe, and not only an ingredient, an important ingredient of the material universe. So we find that Tamishra is, Prabhupada glosses it as anger, but it's also envy. So Tamishra is envy. First of all, envy of the Supreme Lord. We don't want to serve God. We would want to be little gods ourselves. And of course, sometimes this is called our personal God project. So each one of us has a little project going on that we are convinced that we actually are God. And it's up to us now to prove it to everybody else. And so we are trying to show how wonderful and magnitudinal we are in various ways. And this is our God project. And this is Tamishra, the first type of, the first flavor of ignorance, which is envy. So we envy each other, we envy God, we're angry. And the second type of ignorance is Andhatra-mishra, which is considering that that death is the end of everything. So this is also an important aspect of the material world. People who come here have to be ignorant of God, envious of God, to have come here in the first place. And then secondly, they have to think that death will end everything. It's the end of it. And therefore, mostly atheists are constantly saturating the world with this propaganda that at death everything is finished. Because we don't have to worry about karma or whatever we do, our actions are whatever they may be, but we don't have to think about what's going to happen after we die, because there won't be anything to happen after we die. We will cease to exist. So therefore, we don't have to worry about the repercussions of things we do. So that's Anda Tamishra. Then after that, we have tamas. And tamas is no understanding at all of the soul. So therefore, these three are very important ingredients of the world that we live in, that we are envious of God. We think that death finishes everything. And we have no conception of the soul. And so if we look at modern people, all those forms of ignorance apply. Most modern people think in this way. So now we have two further flavors of ignorance that Brahma has to generate, and that is moha. And moha is the conviction that we are this body. So that's moha. That's an important aspect of the material world. So before you create beings, you have to create these kinds of ignorance that the living being can then be subjected to once he's created. And whatever kind of body the living entity becomes incarnated in, these five kinds of ignorance will cover the living entity. Now, finally, we have Mahamoha, which is, as Prabhupada puts, being mad after material happiness. So the living entity is envious of Krishna. He thinks that death is the end of everything. He has no knowledge of the soul. He is convinced that he is the body. And then he becomes completely involved in a project to enjoy the material world in various kinds of sense gratification. So these five types of illusion are created. It's the first thing that Brahma does. So it's in his unfolding the material universe, after making the planetary systems, he does this by generating these five kinds of ignorance from his shadow. Then after having generated them from his shadow, he's not very happy about it, and he casts these five kinds of ignorance off. And these are immediately seized by the Rakshasas and the Yakshas. So the Yakshas and Rakshasas take possession of this shadow body that Brahma casts off. It goes on beyond that, but I don't want to go further into that whole manifestation of how things go on, because I just want to highlight this fact that Brahma is creating these various living, preliminary manifestations that need to be in place before the material universe can fully be populated. So we find that he generates various kinds of classifications of living beings from his body. So when he casts off that body, then essentially he has a different body. And so he does this a number of times. And this is one aspect of how creation is manifested. And as Krishna Kripa was saying, in another place we hear about the generation of Prajapatis, that the first entity that Brahma creates is the four Kumaras. So we read about them here in today's verse. So Brahma, generating living entities, he creates from his mind the four Kumaras. And he wants them to help him in the process of filling the universe with beings. But the four Kumaras, They look like 4 young boys. They appear to be 5 years old, but they are actually the oldest beings in the universe, aside from Brahma himself. And they refuse to cooperate with him in creating children because they don't want to be involved in sex life. So this disturbs Brahma, and he becomes angry, but he tries to control his anger. So he controls it, but it comes out anyway as a second child, which is Shiva. So Shiva is a manifestation of Brahma's anger at his first creation, the 4 Kumaras. And then Lord Brahma says, okay, your elder brothers, the 4 Kumaras, they wouldn't help me with generating living entities, but I want you, my dear Shiva, to generate living entities. And then Shiva immediately begins to generate living entities, but they are ghosts and spirits and demons, and they start tearing up the universe even before it's fully deployed. They start having a devastational effect on the universe. And therefore Brahma says, my dear Shiva, thank you, thank you, thank you. Just please meditate, don't create any more living entities. So clearly Brahma's having a rough time. So then later on we will see more Prajapatis are generated by Brahma. And Prajapatis are a class of living being that are part of the creational unfoldment to generate various types of living entities and to generate many, many, many more living entities. So eventually we come to Kasyap Muni and his wives, and it's from Kasyap Muni and his various wives, who are demigoddesses, who are able to create living beings of various species or types. So from them, from Aditi, we have the demigods. From Diti, we have the demons come from her. We have, Binata, the birds, and Garuda come from her. And we have Kadru, the snakes, come from her. And we have various other wives of Kasyap Muni, which generate various offspring which are not physically identical to them. Generally, we see that in our world that we know, that we have experienced, that when husbands and wives generate children, the children look something like them. But in this case, this is not what's happening. That because we have no various kinds of bodily forms or patterns yet, through these various wives of Kasyap Muni, we get the plants. There's one wife of Kasyap Muni who's the progenitor of all the plants, one that's the progenitor of all the insects, one that's the progenitor of all the cloven footed beasts, and then we have another one, so on and so forth. There's all these various bodily types, and they come from the progenitor Kasyap Muni with his various wives. So this is how the species are developed in the world. They do not come about as a result of the Darwinian concept of gradually evolving by having some kind of mutation according to various kinds of pressures by natural selection. So this is not the process that generates the various types of bodies, but rather these bodily blueprints or formulas are already there. But when Brahma gets to the stage where we have Kasyap Muni developing with his wives, then we get these various kinds of living entities. So now we have the planets, and now we have the various bodily forms, and then we begin to see the universe as we experience it today. Of course, these things all happened countless eons ago, so we don't have any way of directly knowing how this took place. We only know it through the pages of Śhrīmad-Bhāgavatam, which gives us this information that otherwise we wouldn't be able to have access to. So, any questions about any of that? Yes, Krishna.
Because it sounds sort of far out to me, it's like the thought of Daksha who gave birth to the snakes and stuff like that.
Right.
So the Buddha hypothesized because these Prajapatis, they have the ability to change their form.
Right.
The male Prajapati would become a male snake, and the female Prajapati would become a female snake, and then they would beget snakes.
I
And then they would change their form and beget something else. And that way it's at least more conceivable like that happened.
Yeah, one of the things I think that we need to focus on, and I sometimes bring it up because I think it's important, is that magic is alive and well. There is it's not something that science got rid of, that things happen in ways that we never see them happen in our everyday world, especially at the beginning of creation. That the energies of the Supreme Lord are, at this point, in this stage of creation, the energies of the Supreme Lord work in a very methodical and patterned way, and the scientists study that. And that's what we call physics, that's what we call biology, that's what we call meteorology, et cetera, et cetera. Things happen in a way that we recognize, and they more or less follow a particular pattern. But when things are first getting off, all the bets are off. Stuff happens in ways that doesn't follow our scientific understanding of things, because in fact they are Krishna's energies. And there's no reason that Krishna's energies at the very outset have to follow some laws of logic or physics. That happens later, but in the beginning they don't. And of course, Krishna's energies are, after all, Krishna's energies, so they can do anything in any kind of way. That we hear about all the time in the spiritual world, that, Parasya Shakti or Vividaya Shriyate, that Krishna's energies can happen or create whatever he wants without any need for a whole stack of physical interactions in between. It can just go from point A to point B instantaneously because they're his energies, they're unlimited. However, in the material world, at a certain mature stage of development of the material world, at a mature stage, then generally they work in this very specific kind of strange and intricate, convoluted, and very specific way, that one thing goes to another thing, goes to another thing, like you look at a computer, what's going on in there, you've got your CPU, you've got the various forms of RAM, some kind of memory, you've got bridge, you've got all these different kinds of communication, you've got something which does a clock, all these very detailed, intricate interactions that happen in a very specific way. And this is the way our world generally works now. But in the beginning, when things are just getting started, then Krishna's energies are doing things in unexpected ways without having to necessarily go through all these physical details. And of course, we should always remember that even now, there's no reason Krishna can't bypass the usual laws of physics, and he usually does it in some cases, But he doesn't do it very often, and so the scientists have no problem, that generally their laws work, and generally things do follow a certain pattern. But at any time, Krishna can bypass any of that. He can have his energies act in some magical or some miraculous way that defies the laws of physics. And in fact, these things happen all the time. Sariputta, in his book, Alien Identities, he talks about Lourdes, which is a Catholic holy place where, the Virgin Mary appeared to, I forget, somebody. And when people go there, they have a spring or something like that where water comes out. And people who have various physical ailments, they take bath. And many people have their bodies completely cured. And so, of course, this bothered medical people. And they wanted to find out, what was really going on. So Sariputta describes that they have a team of doctors there which investigate, a person's particular material problem, There was one, there's a lot of, he gives these case histories of a man who went there and had a degenerative problem with his hip bone. His whole lower part of his body was kind of dissolving away. The bones were, just kind of disintegrating. But he took bath in Lourdes, and it appeared like the bone just regenerated the same way it was before anything happened. Medical science has no precedent for things like that happening. It just doesn't happen. It never happens. If somebody heals, there's a scar or something like that, and there's no case histories of bones regenerating themselves. That's things that lizards do. Humans don't do that kind of thing. So they had a cast on him because he had, his body would have fallen apart if they took the cast off. But they took X-rays, and it appeared that his bone was normal, the way it should be for an ordinary human being. They took the cast off. He walked. He had no problem after that. And so here it is, one of these examples of edge cases of the twilight zone, whatever you want to call it, these kind of things which happen in our everyday world, where Krishna's energies work in some amazing way that isn't the usual way they work, through physics and chemistry and the usual biological, progress that we study about and know, and we, make an effort to learn about. And usually we are subjected to these things, but there are these kind of things that happen. So I think that this kind of explains to me the whole mystery of how a very detailed universe can get manifested, It isn't the way Darwin thinks, or even the way the Big Bang thinks, Certainly we could call it a Big Bang, everything's coming out of Mahavishnu, that could be called a Big Bang. But the way everything finally falls into place and all these systems start working and everything starts to create the world that we see today. How do we get here from the Brahman? This is the way it happens, through these various energies. Krishna has unlimited energies and he has limited energies. So some of his energies are unlimited, they can act in any kind of way, and some of his energies are limited energies, they act only in very specific ways. And at any time, Krishna can switch categories. He can make an unlimited energy, a limited energy, or an unlimited energy, a limited energy. He can do what he wants with it. And this is why, at this stage, when we talk about these things, logic doesn't help us much. And so that's why it's called achintya. Achintya means inconceivable. So the idea is the Supreme Lord is inconceivably one and different. Any other questions or realizations? Yeah.
Thank you for the nice description. I appreciate that. This is like a comment and a question.
Uh-huh.
So I was wondering, it seems like when you're talking about the way that physical laws usually work, it seems like we're talking about Earth, right?
Well, right, but most of the other planetary systems do have some types of physical laws too, although the demigods are at the level where they can play with all that stuff if they want, you know. So the demigods can change their form, and they can change their size, and they can cause things to generate or to degenerate. Even people who are mystic yogis can do that to some extent.
Yeah, that was kind of my question. The laws that work on like higher dimensions or higher planets, to us here on Earth will seem far out and illogical.
Right.
So it was like a comment.
Right, right. So that's the whole idea, that there's another technology. We are very, very proud of our, iron and electronic and atomic and gas-powered technology that we live with, you know. But it's not the only technology. That in India there was another technology, and that technology is lost to us, but not to everybody. It's still there. Yeah.
I have another comment. I guess I just had this image in my head from the comment that you made about the other planetary systems and stuff. So I think of it like this, like Krishna is like the ultimate creator, and so at many different levels, there are different laws, and so every creator, like Krishna is the creator that creates another creator, and he gives those creators certain laws that they can create like within those bounds, and then those creators create other mini creators, and they give them a certain amount of laws, and we can create within those bounds. And each level can only understand like up to their boundaries. So for example, if you have like an art teacher, and the art teacher is Krishna, the great master, and he has like pastels and paints and glitters and, you know, all of these supplies that he can use to create the universe. And then there's the student, and he says, here's like crayons and paper. And so we create with our crayons and paper, and we're like, okay, this is how this works. And we figure out what we can create with this. But then when we look at like the masterpiece that Krishna creates with the glitter and the pastels and everything, we're like, wow, like that's magnificent. How did you, like it's inconceivable, but it's only because we don't have those tools.
Right.
We only have a set amount that we can create with, and everything outside of that seems inconceivable, but it really is conceivable within that balance. So I guess the demigods might have glitter and crayons and paper when we only have paper and crayons. And then someone above that might have more to create with, so.
Well, that's basically how it works. So the demigods are the middle administrators of the universe. They're the ones who are given the tools by Krishna to run the universe. So they have tools we don't have. And through mantras and through mystic power, they can affect our universe in ways that would seem magical to us, but they're not magical to them. They know the technology and how it works. And even, what to speak of the demigods, in the 11th canto, I believe it is, Krishna explains mystic powers, which even human beings can have, you know, if they follow the yoga system. You know, of course, it's not easy, and most people can never do it, but you can even play around with that stuff being a human, but you have to go through a lot of meditation and austerity to do it, you know. So you can become, you know, there's anima, mahima, lagima, prapti, prakamya, ishita, vashita. There are these various yogic powers, you know, to make yourself tiny, to make yourself heavy, to fly in the air at will, to, you know, create things that violate nature, or to create things that don't violate nature, to pull things from other locations. So these are various mystic powers that even human beings can have. So the demigods automatically have those, you know, but they have even more than that. And this is a type of technology. And it's a technology that's lost in our modern world. Instead, we do things, you know, in a crude mechanical way with, you know, computer chips, jumbo jets, and gas-powered, you know, various kinds of engines and so forth, you know. Okay, I don't want to, I thank you all for your kind attention. It was a nice reciprocation today, so all glories to Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, all glories to the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord. Hare Krishna.